Here's what's coming up on Network Africa today. Bodies of 16 people believed to be migrants found on Mauritania coast. Liberians vote in runoff presidential elections. Plus, Sudan's army chief holds talks with Kenyan President William Ruto in Nairobi, Kenya. Hello and welcome to Network Africa on Channels Television. I'm Anne Umawado here in Lagos, Nigeria. Let's begin in Mauritania, where the bodies of 16 people have been found on the country's northern coast. According to authorities, the bodies of the victims believed to be migrants were discovered on the beaches of Logueria. This comes just 1 week after 13 corpses were found in boats in the same area, and the latest incident appears to have happened after their boat hit some rocks there. Recently, there's been a sharp increase in the number of people setting off from neighboring Senegal in a bid to reach Spain's Canary Islands. But since January, more than 23,000 people have arrived there by boat. Over in Zimbabwe, where a decomposed body of an opposition activist has been found on the outskirts of the country's capital, Harare. The activist, identified as Atapfumane Messiah, was abducted and forced into a vehicle while campaigning ahead of key by-elections slated for December this year. His party, the Citizens Coalition for Change, the CCC, is now calling on the police to investigate this crime and bring the perpetrators to justice. The by-elections are being held following what the party has said was an illegal and fraudulent recall of its members. The death of this activist follows a pattern of abductions of opposition politicians and human rights activists in Zimbabwe. From Zimbabwe to Liberia, where voting has started and is continuing in the presidential run-up election after the two leading candidates were separated by just over 7,000 votes in the first round just a month ago. They are choosing between incumbent and one-time football star George Weah and former Vice President Joseph Boakai. And the president narrowly won the first round, but he failed to get more than 50% of the vote, triggering the runoff election. The voting in October was fraught with allegations of fraud and violence. The Election Commission said that 9 out of its temporary staff had been arrested over alleged ballot tampering. And staying with elections, but this time in Madagascar, opposition is calling on voters to boycott Thursday's presidential election amid worsening political tension across the country. 10 of the 13 presidential candidates registered for this election have been demanding an overhaul of the country's highest court and electoral commission before the polls take place. They allege that incumbent President Andre Rajoelina, who is seeking a re-election, is ineligible due to the French citizenship he acquired back in 2014, but he, however, dismissed this accusation. The leader of the lower house of parliament, who is a member of the president's own party, has also called for the vote to be suspended as the conditions were not right. Over the past 6 weeks, hundreds of opposition supporters have continued to hold banned marches in the capital, which police have routinely dispersed using tear gas. They have also arrested some opposition supporters in the process. Let's head to Sudan, where the military ruler, Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, has met Kenyan President William Ruto in Nairobi. According to the Kenyan presidency website, the two leaders held bilateral talks on the recent security situation in Sudan and the region. They also reviewed the state of ongoing peace initiatives, including the Jeddah and the Intergovernmental Authority on Development's IGAD peace processes. Talks between the Sudanese army and rivals from the Rapid Support Forces resumed in the Saudi port city of October on October the 26th, but mediators including the United States, Saudi Arabia, IGAD and African Union failed to compel both sides to uphold a ceasefire. Mr. Ruto and General Borhan also called for an acceleration of the slow Jeddah talks and a dialogue framework through IGAD peace process. General Borhan previously rejected Kenyan-led mediation efforts, and that's after accusing Mr. Ruto of backing the RSF, which has been at war with the Sudanese army since mid-April. To other stories now, negotiations for the global treaty against plastic pollution has kicked off in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. And Kenyan President William Ruto has called for the speedy process of negotiators to strike a deal in order to curb plastic pollution. According to the United Nations Environment Programme, the world produces about 400 million metric tons of plastic waste a year, and less than 10% of it is recycled, while at least 14 million metric tons of plastic waste end up in the ocean every year. More piles up in landfills.
As we begin this third session of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, I urge all the negotiators to recall that 2024 is only 6 weeks away and only 2 other meetings to go. I reiterate my confidence in your ability to get this done, to repay the faith humanity has placed on you to deliver this moment in history, to chart a path forward for the planet and people against one of the biggest threats we have ever faced. Change is inevitable. This treaty, this instrument that we are working on is the first domino in this change.
Of heart diseases and aggravating respiratory problems.
I would like to affirm Kenya's commitment to ending plastic pollution. We demonstrated this commitment with a ban on the manufacture and use of polythene bags in 2017, followed closely in 2020 with a ban on single-use plastics in protected areas such as national parks, forests, and beaches. Further, in July 2022, Kenya enacted the Sustainable Waste Management Act, which made our country the first in the world to subject all products, including plastics, to extended producer responsibility.
So this is an opportunity to completely discuss all the issues that we need to be discussing for having a text. As you know, the mandate is for having a text at the end of 2024. I hope that the spirit of Nairobi, which was here where we adopted the resolution, UNEA 514, which started this whole process, will help us to find ways to find common solutions to this urgent problem of plastic pollution.
I want to emphasize, as I did in my opening speech in the plenary, that the life cycle element is crucial. This instrument is not about recycling and improving recycling. This instrument is not just about waste management or cleanups. It is about a complete rethink on how we use plastics. We need fewer virgin materials. We need to reduce the unnecessary and eliminate the unnecessary.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to call to the session to order. Please give the floor to Argentina. The microphone is off.
The country-driven process, and therefore we request you to address our concerns as requested. Thank you.
The floor to a representative of Nigeria, followed by Jamaica and Guinea.
In this event and for the warm reception extended to us since our arrival in Nairobi.
I told you earlier about Sudan's military ruler, Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, meeting Kenyan President William Ruto in Nairobi. And now we have VOA's managing editor in South Sudan, John Tanza, joins me now from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for joining us on Network Africa.
My pleasure to be on this program.
All right. Give us a humanitarian situation in South Sudan, considering the fighting is going on in neighboring Sudan. We also understand that thousands have fled into the country. What's going on?
I mean, the humanitarian situation in South Sudan is very serious because the influx of refugees and returnees from Sudan is impacting on an already dire situation where the host communities are also struggling to survive. So when I was in Juba, I visited the Goram refugee camp, that was last week, and spoke with the Sudanese refugees who told me stories about how it's difficult for them to get water, how it's difficult for them to get shelter, how it's difficult for them to get medical care. And when I spoke to the locals, they are like, our situation is just like that of the refugees. So we are also looking for help. That's how the situation is in South Sudan.
All right, but what more do we know regarding that meeting between Sudan's military ruler, Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, meeting the Kenyan President William Ruto, and that happened in Nairobi? What more can you tell us about that meeting?
That meeting came in the backdrop of, the IGAD countries. The IGAD countries had proposed William Ruto to be the mediator between al-Burhan and General Hamdan Dagalo, and Kenya rejected that proposal, saying that Kenya is not neutral in the conflict, and al-Burhan refused the candidature of William Ruto. And so later, the IGAD countries went and met in Djibouti, and they proposed that President Salva Kiir should be the mediator between these two rival forces in Sudan. But then when this was happening, the Saudis and the Americans took the talks together, and the IGAD countries were not happy because they believe that this is an African problem which needs an African solution. And so this latest meeting between al-Burhan and President Ruto came as a surprise because Burhan didn't like the role of Ruto mediating between the two of them, but they have agreed, the two leaders, that is President William Ruto and General al-Burhan, they have agreed to hold an IGAD meeting in Nairobi, date to be confirmed, but they want to speed up the process because the two presidents, the two leaders are saying the Jeddah process is very slow and the situation in Sudan needs an urgent action. Something has to be done to stop the fighting because what is happening now, they want to silence the guns so that they can deliver food to people who are trapped inside cities in Sudan.
All right, thank you very much. VOA's managing editor in South Sudan, John Tanza. Thanks a lot for your contribution on Network Africa.
My pleasure.
To peacekeeping operations now, the United Nations Secretary General Special Representative for Somalia, Katrina Liang, has visited the Portland state of Somalia. During her visit, she met with the president of Portland, who said that the other political actors and members of the civil society. Ms. Liang commended the leaders for their efforts and their successful district elections in the month of May. She is also calling for the inclusion of women and youth in the electoral process.
Scholars and so on, to include them, to ensure that when the elections take place, that there's consensus and, of course, peaceful elections. I was encouraged to hear the President is continuing to be willing to engage with the President and eventually the more widely, and is thinking about the kind of issues that need to be on the table to ensure Puntland's views are represented. To commend Puntland for reaching out and supporting the many IDPs who came here from the Sul region, up to 100,000. I know that's been a big responsibility, and we thank Puntland for receiving those people warmly.
Welcome back. Severe flooding in Somalia's Dolo district has forced residents to leave their homes, causing food shortages. Some families have been moved to internally displaced camps for their own safety, while some have stayed in flood-ravaged villages to pick up the pieces. United Nations has described the floods in Somalia and neighboring countries in East Africa following a historic drought as a once-in-a-century event.
This is the situation in Somalia's Dolo district. Vehicles can be seen trapped in the floods. In some of the worst hit areas, movement has become dangerous as residents fear the possibility of encountering crocodiles and other animals hiding in the water. The situation has been made worse as roads leading to the town of Dolo have been caught by the flood waters, hampering the delivery of essential goods and increasing fears of an impending food shortage.
I fled from Galbolo village and all of our houses and kiosks were full of flood water. All our utility, food and mattresses were washed away by floods. Now we do not have any food at all.
This shop owner feels the impact of the disaster.
The floods had a serious impact on business because there are no goods coming to the town. We can't bring goods by plane. There is a serious shortage of goods, fuel, food, and all other things in the city.
According to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, around 1.6 million people in Somalia could be affected by the heavy seasonal downpours, which have been worsened by the combined impact of two climate phenomena, El Nino and the Indian Ocean Dipole.
The Chinese government has expressed its readiness to collaborate with the federal government to achieve carbon neutrality within the shortest time. The Consul General of the People's Republic of China in Lagos, Yang Qiang, made this known at the China-Africa Economic Growth event right here in Lagos, where she mentioned, among other things, that both countries were steadily increasing cooperation in trade and in investment. On her part, a two-time former Minister of Trade, Dr. Nike Akonde, commended the Chinese government's efforts in advancing the relations between both countries.
So we are blessed with the presence of
China has launched the initiative on supporting Africa's industrialization, plan for China supporting Africa's agricultural modernization, and plan for China-Africa cooperation on talent development.
Nigeria and China have a robust diplomatic relationship. The same can be said of the trade relationship between our two countries. I therefore appreciate this effort aimed at deepening this relationship and make it more mutually beneficial.
Nigeria made her position clear on the Israeli-Palestinian crisis in an emergency joint Arab-Islamic summit in Saudi capital Riyadh. Her leaning coincides with the ongoing Israeli bombardment of the Gaza Strip. The summit was convened to discuss the war taking place in the Gaza Strip and the Palestinian territories.
We meet under tragic circumstances when sustained attacks on the Gaza Strip has led to the senseless loss of human lives, continues to threaten the lives of innocent civilians, and has created a humanitarian disaster. Nigeria welcomes this intervention by the OIC and the Arab League to emphatically add its voice to the call for an end to the violence and loss of lives of innocent civilians. The disproportionate use of force against the people of Gaza begs the question, how many more must die to avenge the act of aggressors? Abrahamic religions have provided ample guidance for governments to follow for declaring war against another. The writings of 12th century scholar Bin Rushdi, known in the Western world as Averroes, on the subject of just war, influenced many, including the Christian philosopher St. Thomas Aquinas. Collectively, this body of work provided for what came to be known as the just war theory, that governments, responsible governments, use to determine whether war and aggression is morally justifiable. The war against the people of Gaza cannot be contemplated in the same breath of the just war doctrine and has to stop for the sake of humanity. Pray tell, where is the rule of law? Your Excellencies, today we live in a data-driven world. The question we have to ask ourselves is, where is the evidence that the violence meted out by Israel on Gaza is having any deleterious effect on Hamas? We must work collectively to bring an end to the violence and find a lasting solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict based on the UN-prescribed two-state solution. Nigeria stands firmly by this. Thank you for listening.
A sudden and intense hailstorm struck several parts of Johannesburg, South Africa on Monday evening, blocking highways, damaging gardens, vehicles, car parks, buildings, roads and other property. South African online newspaper Times Live also reported the hailstones were as big as golf balls. Johannesburg Emergency Management Services spokesperson Robert Maludzi described the flash floods from the storm hitting some parts of the city, but no injuries nor deaths were recorded. He also added that authorities had provided emergency services to affected families and will remain on high alert to respond to any reported incident. The Nigerian ambassador to South Africa, His Excellency Mohammed Haruna Manta, has highlighted significant commitments from both the Nigerian and the South African governments aimed at enhancing the livelihoods of Nigerians residing in South Africa. The ambassador made these remarks during his farewell party in Johannesburg, South Africa. Mr. Haruna Manta arrived in South Africa on the 22nd of July 2021 as the High Commissioner to Nigeria to the Republic of South Africa and the Kingdoms of Lesotho, Eswatini. Manta's term officially ends in November 2023. A South Africa correspondent Innocent Samosa reports.
It was an afternoon filled with nostalgia and celebration as diplomats, government officials and members of the community gathered for the end-of-term party of Ambassador Haruna Manta. Guests enjoyed a day of cultural exchange and delicious Nigerian cuisine. We had the opportunity to speak with some of the attendees about Ambassador Manta's tenure and the impact he has made during his time in South Africa.
He has done very well here in South Africa, and I wish him better in his next endeavors, you understand.
The Consulate General of Nigeria in Johannesburg, Andrew Edie, says Ambassador Manta's diplomatic skills have been crucial in navigating various challenges and strengthening the bilateral relationship.
No doubt, his skills did help in coordination, in cooperation, and in fostering further the relations between the two countries, whether it's in the area of economic matters, political matters, consular and immigration matters. We won't be where we are today, but for the effective skills he brought to bear on the relations. I think he's done well. He's put in all he can to the relations.
Ambassador Haruna Manta says the journey has been pleasant but not without challenges.
My stay in South Africa has been a very pleasant one, very challenging I must say, but pleasant in the sense that every minute has been very, very challenging, and every minute has taken the best out of me in an effort to improve relations and to satisfy the yearnings of my government and the people of Nigeria.
Manta says there are commitments from both governments to improve the well-being of Nigerians in South Africa.
So far, so good, because what we have experienced is positive improvement on both sides. The two governments have been doing their bit, and then the citizens have also improved on an effort to find a very, very amicable and lasting solution to our problems. But I must say that the challenge we have is that the build-up over many years of non-renewal of resident permits, even for bona fide citizens and genuine entrepreneurs, has been a challenge, and that build-up is huge.
Many thanked Ambassador Manta's efforts in building and maintaining positive diplomatic relations during his term. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Innocent Samos, Channels Television News.
And on that very delicious note, we end Network Africa for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Anne Nwawadu.